It's a delight to welcome you all. I'd particularly like to thank the Dialogue Society, Niran and her colleagues, for making this room look more hospitable than I've ever known it. It's a real delight. So thank you for that, and thank you for the partnerships that we're forming in a number of areas of our work. It was wonderful to have Dr. Omar Shenar with us over the weekend at our residential for students of different faiths as part of their leadership programme. I feel like I've spent a lot of the last 2 years talking with journalists and other academics about faith communities and the internet and online community and how it's transforming us and the opportunities that it's bringing. And indeed, my colleague Dr. Manmit Banbra led on a piece of research that we did about interfaith work during the pandemic and the impact of the internet. There's some copies available at the back, I think, if anybody wants to take one. And one of the things she identifies is the way in which the internet has created new fora, has democratised the interfaith sphere for a number of more marginalised groups. But I'm afraid I still hold the view that the internet tends towards polarisation. And it does so for the very uncomplicated reason that it is economically profitable for those people who control the internet to make it so. And so for those of us who are interested in dialogue and bringing people together and deepening understanding, we need to be very aware of that agenda and work out how we relate to it, how we respond to it, and how we challenge it. So we have seen opportunities through the pandemic, but I think we have also seen an increase in people going into their respective tribes and their echo chambers. So as we've come back onto this campus over the last academic year, which has been such a delight, and resumed the work that this centre does of building relationships and transforming attitudes across our student body, which is drawn from 150 countries. 2/3 of our students are from overseas. So we're working here with students of all nationalities and certainly all religions. As we've resumed that work, we have seen, I'm afraid, some of the legacy of that entrenching into the online echo chambers. And that's been challenging, and we've worked to overcome that. But we've also, I'm delighted to say, seen a real new energy and appetite that young people especially have to reconnect in person and to reach out across religious difference, cultural difference, and all other kinds of differences. And so we've come to the end of the second of 2 fantastic terms here on the LSE campus, where community spirit has been rekindled within the different religious communities themselves, but also where there's been extraordinary reaching out, and we've seen new interfaith events organised by the student societies themselves, not waiting for us to guide them towards that. And we've even seen, for the first time in my decade at LSE, some ecumenical conversation between Christians, which is very rarely happens, and of course is always more difficult than the conversations we have across religions. So that's been a real delight. And it's a delight to celebrate the end of that period with all of you here tonight, particularly, as I say, with the Dialogue Society. Thank you for everything that you're doing.
But thank you very much, and it's really brilliant to be here, so thank you for the invitation. And it's been great. I've been working with Nuran and a group of students over the last few weeks. Well, they've been doing the work. I've just sat at home on Zoom talking to them while they've been involved in the research we've been doing around the issue of online interfaith dialogue. What happens when people meet online? Is it an authentic meeting? Are people transformed through it? And it's been brilliant working with students from LSE who have produced a really high quality report. And they won. You won something. I wasn't there when you were told you won. So give us a wave, the students who were involved, because I've only ever seen you on Zoom, so I've no idea what you look like in real life. So if you can hold a frame around your head, I'll recognise you. But they won an award. Give them a round of applause. They won. They were brilliant. So thank you very much. That's fantastic. 2 years ago, 2 things were happening. We were in that first lockdown. Do you remember the really hardcore lockdown? The lockdown 101, the first one, the original. You remember that? two things happened. One was I was on a Zoom meeting with people from all different countries, and I came out of the Zoom meeting and I talked to my two lads who were both at university. They were both at home at that time, and I was trying to keep them fed, which was a challenge. And I said, hey, I've been on a Zoom call with people from about 7 different countries, aren't I cool? And they looked at me witheringly, as only students can, and went, welcome to our world. Because they are people who live online, kind of gaming, constantly engaging with people from around the world. That's how their lives have been for years and years, because they spend a lot of time online gaming. But they're actually very good at it, so I'm quite proud. But the other thing that happened 2 years ago was not only did we get used to this whole thing about doing Zoom, those of us who weren't used to online gaming, but there was a lot of talk about reimagining. Do you remember that? There was lots of talk. People talked about, in this first lockdown, we were going to reimagine the workplace. We were going to reimagine worship. We were going to reimagine community. And I heard lots of people thinking, gosh, although this is traumatic and challenging, there's a moment here where we can reset, we can reimagine. And I think the enthusiasm for that came because we all assumed that by the autumn we'd be back out and we could do new exciting things. And there was lots of this, we're going to reimagine. Well, of course, 2 years later, it all felt like it ground on a bit, didn't it? That second lockdown a year ago that didn't feel nearly as exciting as the first one, where it really felt tough. And it seems to me now when I talk to people, I don't get the let's reimagine wow, I get the yeah, whatever. Whatever. We just want to get on with life. And it's great to hear that there's been some really exciting things here at the university. I was just hearing about kind of weekends away, kind of really going well in this new kind of, now we can meet together again. But I talk to a lot of people of different faiths who are finding that people aren't turning up to churches, gurdwaras, mandirs, synagogues, mosques in the way they did before. People aren't engaging in different places. Workplaces are finding people don't want to come back into the office. And people are feeling a bit weary. And I'm sensing a lot of kind of... And I think, therefore, the word rekindling is absolutely spot on for where we are now. Because we've moved away perhaps, let's reimagine, but we need to rekindle. And that word, it kind of comes from kind of making fires, doesn't it? Those of you who've done kind of camping and lit kind of fires, you'll know that you have to get your kindling, and then if it kind of dies down and you want to rebuild it, you have to rekindle it. You have to kind of get it going again. And if you want to rekindle a fire, I'm not much of a fire. I've got a log burner at home. I spend a lot of time with a chainsaw and an axe and playing with fires. So I'm a bit of a pyromaniac, so this is my thing. But I've tried to rekindle a fire, and I've learned you need 3 things. You need the kindling, you need the wood, you need the fuel. You also need some oxygen. You need to get some air in there. You need to give it a good blow, get some bellows, get some oxygen. And you need a bit of a spark, something to make it kind of really get going. And I think that's a lovely image, a metaphor for where I think we are. How do we rekindle our community spirit when a lot of people are feeling worn out? And I sense a bit of the fuel, the people we're mixing with. Some of them are like dry kindling, ready to get going. Others, I think, after 2 years feel rather soggy and damp and in need of a bit of care and a bit of nurture to get them going again. A bit of space to sit in the sun and dry out, I think, is what a lot of people are looking for. So we might need to give people a bit of space as we try and rekindle. We might be full of enthusiasm. We might be thinking, do you know what? I just need to kind of chill a bit. And there'll be those who need that time to rekindle. But then we need that oxygen, don't we? That thing that breathes life into us. And for those of us of people of faith, there'll be things that we draw on from our faiths that breathe life. And there'll be things that you draw on, whether it's your prayer life, whether it's music, whether it's reading scripture, whether it's worship in a place of worship. But I wonder what it is that breathes life for you. And for Christians, we talk about God's Holy Spirit being like breath, being like the wind that breathes that life. And then we need a spark. The idea, and we've heard some of those today, that spark that goes, yeah, let's do that. Let's get together. Let's do this thing. And there's lots of opportunity, especially when you're at university, for let's get on and do that. And sometimes it's joining in with other people's ideas. Sometimes it's saying, oh, I've got an idea, let's do this. Let's run with it. And I think for me, that's the challenge of where we're at the moment. How do we rekindle this community spirit? How do we find those people who do feel dried out and ready to get going? How do we care for those people who are feeling a bit soggy and a bit, I need to recover? What do we draw on spiritually to make this happen? People of no faith can also draw on things, but those of us of people of faith have something deep that we can draw on, that we can kind of really breathe life. And then how do we work together to create that spark? And the Dialogue Society, I know the Faith Centre here, have all sorts of things going that create sparks, where people join in, where people get going. And together, I think with those three things, we can work together in this idea of rekindling the community spirit. So I hope those give you a few thoughts just to kind of think about as we share the rest of the evening together. But thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to share a few thoughts this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I don't want to touch anything. First of all, it's a real delight to be here. So thank you both for the invitation and for asking me to share a few words on the theme of rekindling the community spirit. Reflecting as an Orthodox Jew on the upcoming festival of Pesach, of Passover, I can't help but be drawn by the pertinence of it focusing our minds to the issues of human freedom, of personal and communal liberty, and of personal and communal responsibility. And I'm also attending an Iftar at the LSE, the space in which my personal proclivities and associations become part of a larger body of people's lives. So with this in mind, I want to think about the overarching themes of Passover. So firstly, the obsession with storytelling, year after year. And secondly, the concept of active remembering of the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt. This momentous event, its drawn-out descriptions in biblical texts, plays a foundational role in our identity. We were enslaved, and now we are free. But why are we persistently commanded to remember it? What are we to learn from the experience? And what are we to do with that freedom? The Exodus story and the importance of remembering it is also mentioned not only in the biblical and rabbinic texts, but also in our daily prayers. Over and over and over again, we're told, I am God, your Lord, who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be your Lord. I am God, your Lord. So this particular verse is from Numbers, but there are many similar verses, over 50 actually, which mention the Exodus from Egypt in the Hebrew Bible. Moreover, this verse is repeated 3 times a day in the morning, evening, and bedtime prayer, Shema. Hear, listen, O Israel. And on the upcoming Seder night, the first evening of Passover, we read the Passover Haggadah, the collection of biblical and rabbinic stories which speak of the Exodus experience and its interpretation and significance throughout generations of Jewish history. The word Haggadah means story, from the Hebrew root to tell, or to pass on, or to make known. For some, this process may take just a couple of hours, but for others, like in my family, it takes them into the wee small hours of the night. And even those, many Jews not usually affiliated with religious ritual, the Seder night and the memories of it have a place of significance in their lives. We begin with an invitation. This is the bread of destitution that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is hungry should come and eat. Anyone who is in need should come and partake. When we read this paragraph, we lift up the unleavened bread, the matzah. We touch it, we see it, we speak about it, and later during the meal we eat it. In this way, we do our best kind of storytelling, attempting to involve as many human senses as possible. An impactful way of creating and recreating memories. And then we begin the elaborate, lengthy, and memorable storytelling. We were slaves to Pharaoh in the land of Egypt, and the Lord our God took us out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. And then the Haggadah adds the following. And even if we were all sages, all discerning, all elders, all knowledgeable, it would still be a commandment to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And anyone who adds and spends extra time in telling the story, it is praiseworthy. I think this is a remarkable and noteworthy comment. Even if we know everything about it, we need to rethink the story. We are nonetheless obligated to repeat it and to just keep speaking about it. The commentary of Rabbi Jacob Ettlinger on this introduction reads as follows. This is the bread of affliction. The Seder begins with the invitation to the needy to join us in the Passover meal, so they won't be embarrassed by sitting at the table of someone wealthier than them. We comfort them by saying, aren't we all brothers and sisters? who were redeemed from the house of bondage, both your and my parents. We do this in order to fulfill the commandment, you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In this way, the needy person, he says, will not be humiliated. In this reading, we see the particularist interpretation of the stranger, the less fortunate Jew, the other Jew. We are thus obligated to ensure that every Jew feels and experiences Seder night as a shared and equitable experience. But what of the more general meaning of the biblical verse in Deuteronomy? You must love the stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This verse generates many questions, but perhaps the most obvious are, how can anybody be commanded to love? What is the definition of a stranger? Why is the command to love the stranger juxtaposed to the slavery in Egypt? And why do we keep repeating this story 3 times a day and year after year after year? I am, as I often am, drawn to the writings of the late Emeritus Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks. He asks this question on the narrative text in Genesis. Why is Genesis not a philosophical text, but rather a set of narratives? Why is Judaism not as system, but as story? And he answers, the immense project of the Bible is undertaking to tell us a series of stories. We can only achieve through narrative to see the world through someone else's eyes, to be able to put ourselves in someone else's situation. Ishmael, Hagar, Esau, that they were loved, that they were blessed by God, that when they cry, God hears, that when they chose another way which is not ours, that too is precious in the eyes of God. For me, this idea contains the essence of Rabbi Sacks' moral perspective towards other peoples, and it is a call to action. And personally, I think it should come as no surprise. We all love stories. Stories that were told to us at bedtime, stories that we read to ourselves. We love Amazon Prime. We love Netflix. And even though we know these stories to be fictional, we nevertheless invest our time and emotions into watching them, into feeling them, into being moved by them. In Exodus chapters 22 and 23, we see the following verses. Do not wrong or oppress the stranger, for you yourselves were once strangers in the land of Egypt. And in the next chapter, do not oppress a stranger, for you know what it feels like to be a stranger, for you yourselves were once strangers in the land of Egypt. And on these verses, Rabbi Sacks writes, note that these commands are given shortly after the Exodus. Implicit in them is that radical idea that care for the stranger is why the Israelites had to experience exile and slavery, before they could enter the promised land and build their own society. You will not succeed in caring for the stranger, implies God, until you yourselves know in your very bones and sinews what it feels like to be a stranger. And this indeed is a radical and astonishing perspective, that the principal reason for our slavery was to ensure that we have the capacity to acknowledge and to understand other people's plight. And further, in his biblical commentary, he says, it is terrifying in retrospect to grasp how seriously the Torah took the phenomenon of xenophobia, hatred of the stranger. It is as if the Torah was saying with the utmost clarity, reason is insufficient, sympathy is inadequate. Only the force of history and memory is strong enough to form a counterweight to hate. Why should you not hate the stranger? Because you once stood where they now stand. I made you into the world's archetypal stranger, says Rabbi Sacks, so that you would fight for the rights of strangers. Because though they are not in your image, says God, they are nonetheless in mine. There is only one reply strong enough to answer the question, why should I not hate the stranger? Because the stranger is me. At this time of year, has been said, when we are steeped in self-reflection, observing Ramadan, celebrating Easter, celebrating Passover, it seems incredibly pertinent to offer care and compassion, not only to every member of our own intimate and particular community, but to every member of our larger community. At some point in all our lives, we experience the feelings of being a stranger. of being excluded, of being misunderstood, of being othered. This Iftar and the joint celebrations with LSE students, with the Faith Centre, with the Dialogue Society, are opportunities not just to speak of and listen to others, but to actually ensure that our memories move us to action, that our stories are shared and heard, and that we are moved by others' stories, so that we can continue transforming ourselves from an assemblage of strangers to a community of friends. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this. Anytime I see an invitation that says dinner, as you might see from my figure, I accept it. And I'm really looking forward to this evening, but I've already had a full dinner, a full meal of interesting and exciting and things to listen to and think about, and some really beautiful music. Thank you for that, it was lovely. I was asked to talk about community, and I know we've got to be very quick. So, community and eating and meals. I think meals are great for community. The nice thing about meeting somebody for a meal is that you've got a beginning and you've got an end. So often when you're talking with people, you're dialoguing, you don't know how long you're meant to go on. It's like even a telephone conversation. You get people going on because they don't want to be the one who cuts you off. And a meal really helps. By the time you've got to coffee, unless you're with the Mormons, then you know it's the end. But you know you've got till then to talk. And that's a great thing. But I think meals where there's a ritual, as there is this evening in a way, and they're connected with some sort of meaning, are really special. I mean, ever since I was a child, I've always encouraged my Jewish friends to invite me around for dinner on Friday evenings to hear all those stories. I loved it, apart from the food, and that was good too. And during my life as a sociologist of religion, I've had all sorts of fantastic meals, really exciting meals. And that's been a really important part of my research. We talk about participant observation as sociologists or anthropologists, where we go and really live with the people. And it's when you're having the meals with people that you really get to know them. And I've got a next door neighbour who's Sikh, and she cooks beautiful meals. And I've got to know all about the Sikhs, well, not all, but quite a bit about the Sikhs, over the most delicious things. I've had all kinds of wonderful meals. The only movement that I've studied is that this hasn't quite worked, is what do they call themselves now, the Plymouth Brethren Christian Community. They're sometimes known as the Exclusive Brethren, because they won't eat with anybody. They're very friendly. They invite me to their house, which is quite unusual, but they do. And they give me a nice meal, but I have to eat in another room. It's a lovely meal. They go in another room and they have their meal. They even give me a glass of wine. But somehow it's not quite the same. Anyway, Iftar, I think my first Iftar was actually with the Dialogue Society. I don't know, 20 years ago or something. It was a long time ago. And I thought how clever the Muslims were to spend a whole month of fasting. And I thought I would come this evening and I would boast to you that I had fasted today. But I'm afraid I've got a confession. I didn't eat, but I sat down at breakfast time with my husband and drank water. And then suddenly it occurred to me, perhaps I shouldn't be drinking water. So I looked it up, and I'm sorry, but I just got to confess. But I hope I can still enjoy the meal. Thank you.